In a recent statement to Politico, Tamila Tashever, the Ukrainian president's envoy on Crimea, asserted that Ukraine is committed to regaining control of Crimea and will employ both political and military means to achieve this goal. Tasheva emphasized the importance of minimizing Ukrainian military losses, protecting civilians in occupied territories, and preserving civilian infrastructure. To this end, Ukraine plans to present Russia with a choice for the peaceful withdrawal from Crimea. However, if Russia does not agree to leave voluntarily, Ukraine will continue its military efforts to liberate its land, according to Tasheva. These remarks follow an interview with Andriy Sybiha, deputy head of the president's office, in which he suggested that Ukraine might be open to discussing the future of Crimea with Moscow if strategic objectives are met on the battlefield. Sybiha expressed a willingness to engage in diplomatic discussions while emphasizing that military action remains an option. Sybiha's comments mark a shift in Ukraine's stance, signaling a willingness to negotiate with Russia for the first time since peace talks were ruled out by Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council in September of last year. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has consistently emphasized the goal of liberating all Ukrainian territories, including Crimea, as outlined in his 10-step peace formula presented at the G20 summit. Prior to the invasion of 2022, Ukraine primarily relied on political and diplomatic channels to regain control of Crimea, which was annexed by Russia in 2014. However, the full-scale invasion and recent events in Bucha, Mariupol, and Izium have led Ukraine to conclude that negotiations are no longer a viable option. The Kremlin's repeated assertions of non-communication regarding the future of the Crimean Peninsula further reinforce this belief, according to Tasheva. Furthermore, Ukrainian officials are actively developing a strategy to address the issue of collaborators in Crimea following its deoccupation. Oleksiy Danilov, Secretary of Ukraine's Security and Defense Council, shared proposals on his Facebook page, which include the forced relocation of Russian citizens who moved to Crimea after 2014 and the restitution of stolen property to Ukrainians. While the ultimate decision on how to proceed rests with the president, Danilov affirmed that preparations are underway to reintegrate Crimea in the most effective manner. Ukraine remains resolute in its position that Crimea is Ukrainian territory and is determined to pursue all available avenues to restore control over the region. The evolving dynamics on the ground and the commitment of Ukrainian officials demonstrate a comprehensive approach to address the issue of Crimea and its future. We are Anka. You can support us with the Super Thanks button and below. The developments in the Russia-Ukraine war have raised many questions along with many problems. The most important of these questions was, why is it fought? Russian soldiers have been asking themselves this question since the day Putin began his occupation of Ukraine. Why are we at war with Ukraine? Russian soldiers find it difficult to answer this question because war is a struggle for the independence and territorial integrity of a country. But is that what Russian soldiers are fighting for? Before answering this important question in detail, we have a reminder. As Inka Daily News team, we continue to report all developments in the Russia-Ukraine war. With an impartial and accurate journalism approach, you can support our team, which strives for the realization of these works by clicking the Super Thanks button. Russian soldiers do not even know what they are fighting for, in which region they are fighting, with whom they are fighting, and against whom they are fighting. Such that Russian soldiers who surrendered to Ukrainian troops admitted in their statements that they did not even recognize their commanders at the front and did not know that they were fighting with Ukraine. This is because the vast majority of Russian soldiers are sent to the occupied territories under pretenses of training and terrorism. In the first month of Putin's occupation of Ukraine, the Russians who opposed the occupation predicted these developments. Therefore, in the second month of the occupation of Ukraine, Prussians formed a group. Moreover, this group was formed under the Ukrainian armed forces. This group, called the Free Russian Legion, was formed when anti-war Russians sought refuge in Ukraine. The aim of the Legion was to stop the occupation of the Russian army in Ukraine. This meant that Russians were fighting their own citizens. The Russians who crossed from Russia to Ukraine defected to the Ukrainian army, stating that they disagreed with Putin's unjust occupation decision and wanted to stop Russia's advance in Ukraine and join Ukrainian resistance. The Free Russian Legion, which was formed with about 100 people, has now exceeded 1,000. A new development in recent days has further strengthened the Free Russian Legion in the city of Mon, where the Russian-Ukrainian war was fiercest. A major development took place. Recently, a group of Russian soldiers in Bakhmut, together with their commanders, laid down their weapons and joined the Free Russian Legion. The soldiers and commanders who concealed their identities stated that they are not afraid of Russian leader of Vladimir Putin and his occupying army. They made this decision because of their experiences on the front line. Russian soldiers said that the Russian state and army do not care about their lives. They explained that Putin had hundreds of thousands of his citizens killed for his own political interests. Therefore, they said they would work to prevent the Russian army's advance in Ukraine. When the Free Russian Legion first informed the Ukrainian armed forces that they wanted to establish a presence on Ukrainian territory, the Ukrainian army was greatly concerned because the Legion would be made up of Russians and would grow with Russian participation. This would allow agents to hide under the umbrella of the Legion. For this reason, the Ukrainian armed forces decided to control Russians who wanted to join the Legion with a detailed examination in constant supervision. Because the Free Russian Legion was a great opportunity for Russian invaders to infiltrate Ukrainian territory. But Ukrainian authorities and commanders took a series of measures to prevent this possibility. Under Ukrainian law, it was forbidden for a Russian citizen to join the Ukrainian armed forces. Andrei Yub, spokesman for the Ukrainian Military Intelligence Service, announced that this law was changed after the measures taken and that joining the Free Russian Legion was made legal. The most striking of these measures was a polygraph testament. Every Russian who wanted to join the Legion had to take a lie detector testament. The Russians who passed the test were put through a very comprehensive and difficult training. Russians who were trained in the use of weapons, tanks, mortars, and missile systems, as well as emergency response and escape from captivity, and who were successful in these trainings, were entitled to join the Legion. Use of explain the purpose of the creation of the Free Russian Legion as follows. There were many Russians who could not remain indifferent because of their moral principles and were looking for a way to join the ranks of the Ukrainian defenders. All the legionnaires came with a great desire to stop Putin's word and liberate Russia from dictatorship. As a result of these developments, the Free Russian Legion has been resisting the Russian occupiers for a year without any problems. Young people with PSA and Caesar are among the Russians fighting against the occupiers. Russian teenagers named Za and Caesar, who did not want to fight against the Ukrainians, together with the Russian invaders, openly explained why they joined the Free Russian Legion. Russian teenagers use aliases to avoid giving their names. This is because their families continue to live in Russia. They hide their identities to avoid any trouble for their families. Zhao says that Russia has been doing it can to end the occupation since the first day it started to occupy Ukraine. Zaza 20 says that while living in Russia, he made a series of posts on his social media accounts, calling on Putin to abandon his decision to invade Ukraine. But as a result of these posts, Russian police knocked on Z's door and warned him. Zaza knows that if he continues to post against the Russian occupation on social media, the Russian police will take him from his home and put him in jail. So he thinks that he should not go to jail and do something to prevent the occupation, and eventually Zaza joins the Free Russian Legion. Zaza explains the purpose of joining the Free Russian Legion is as follows. We are not here to prove anything. We are here to help the Russian forces to completely withdraw from Ukrainian territory and to help Russia to be free of Putin in the future. At such a young age, it is a bit early to talk about my political views and worldview because they are just forming. But when your country is taken over by an evil man, you have to take everything into your own hands. Another name who joined the Free Russian Legion is Caesar. Caesar is a pseudonym like Zazor. Caesar 50 says he joined the Legion because he cannot tolerate all the inhuman behavior of Russia in Ukraine. He believes that a true Russian should not rape children, kill women, and fight against civilians. But Caesar witnessed these developments and left his hometown of St. Petersburg since joining the Free Russian Legion. Caesar confesses that he has killed many invaders and that he feels no remorse or guilt for his actions because he believes that there is no other way to prevent the Russian invaders. The members of the Free Russian Legion who fought against the Russian occupiers have achieved serious success in the war, thanks to the training they received in Kiev. The members of the Legion who are actively involved in almost all of the occupied territories say that they will not leave the region until Putin gives up his plans to occupy Ukraine. What do you think about the Free Russian Legion? If you were a Russian, would you join the Legion? Do you think the operations carried out by the Legion are effective in the course of the war? We are curious about your opinions. Follow us for more updates. One of the hottest parts of the front line right now is the Bakhmut area, and today, a lot of good and bad news is coming exactly from this region. First of all, the Russians attempted to expand the area under their control to the south of Bakhmut. Yesterday, the Russians claimed that they had crossed the canal and advanced westward from Asinovka and Kozhumaivka. Geolocated footage posted the same day showed that Russian forces indeed made marginal advances west of Asinovka and took control of some trenches. If we look closer, we can see that there are two areas where they can cross the canal with no problems. So according to this news, the Russians established control over this triangle and set conditions for advances along the ravine towards Byala-Zora. However, today the Ukrainians have conducted a counterattack in this region and reportedly pushed the Russians back to the other side of the canal. Russian Ministry of Defense only noted that attacks to the south of Bakhmut were upheld, but some even Russian sources say otherwise. Secondly, the Russians conducted an extensive attack on Kievska. Here the Russians made two simultaneous attacks to the north and south of the settlement in an attempt to exploit a possible lack of coordination. So far, I have only seen unofficial and unconfirmed reports. Ukrainian sources suggest that the Russians did not manage to cross the railway, while Russian sources say that they managed to get a toehold to the north by taking control over the train station. If we zoom in, we can see that this train station consists of a tiny building that is located on the other side of the rails, meaning Ukrainian and Russian reports do not conflict with one another, and the Russians might indeed be present to the north of the settlement. However, it is too far of a stretch to call this one isolated. Building a toehold, taking a train station in a big town is a significant victory because the train stations there are big and provide good cover. Taking a train station near a tiny village is usually a liability when it comes to operating. The intensity of the fights here temporarily decreased, according to Ukrainian volunteer servicemen. The reason for that is that Wagner Group forces lost a lot of troops and are in dire need of fresh troops. Intense fights have been taking place for a very long time, and in order to reach a reasonable milestone by the end of the year, the Wagners have been pushing irrespective of the losses. It seems like at some point many assault units have just lost their combat capability due to extensive losses, and they were forced to put further operations on hold in order to at least preserve their current positions. The Ukrainian servicemen also noted that the Wagners will either be reinforced by conventional Russian servicemen, such as Marine detachments from the Volodar area, or by Wagner forces from other regions. Regarding the progress, the latest reports suggest that the Russians still have not passed the church in the southern part of the settlement, meaning that the Ukrainians are still holding their positions tightly in the southeastern part of the city. After successfully establishing control over the local garbage dump, the Russians were not able to develop their offensive further. And it is not surprising because if the Russians move west, they bump into the river. If the Russians move northwest, they bump into the muddy area where there is a small pond. So the Russians can only move north. But it is extremely difficult to do because establishing a toehold takes a lot of time while they will be suffering from the crossfire. When it comes to the eastern side of Bakhmut, last time I told you that the Russians crossed the pond and established total control over several streets. There are still no confirmed updates. So even the Institute for the Study of War concluded that the Russians likely do not have a presence on this side of the pond. This is in line with other developments in this part of the region because the Russians reportedly lost the fight for the champagne winery and vineyard factory in the industrial area and had to step back. The closest Russian positions to the city, therefore, are near this isolated warehouse to the south of the industrial area. When it comes to the northern part of Bakhmut, the most important developments happened around 12 kilometers north of the city. The latest update suggests that the Russians once again established control over Yakovlevka. As you remember, this village is an integral part of the Ukrainian defense line. Yakovlevka is the only settlement located on the local heights, which now allows the Russians to attack Solder from a more advantageous position. I remind you that the Russians could not advance even an inch in solidarity since summer. So the fall of Yakovlevka is a great concern. Nonetheless, even with the Yakovlevka under Russian control, Russian analysts are saying that Solder will not fall easily. If we look closer, we can see that Solder is almost a perfect fortress. It has a layer of small defense positions that stretches far out and serves as a buffer zone. And they have a number of factories and residential areas with tall buildings behind which can be leveraged to control and cower every move around. In many ways, Solder is the key to Bakhmut. So as long as Solder stands, the Russians have virtually no chance to surround Bakhmut and force the Ukrainians to abandon the city.